for Riverina.
And of course, I support the member for Deakin and his amendment, and certainly I know the Coalition has thought long and hard about this, as we do about every bill, and that is why the member for Deakin's amendment needs to be adopted. And certainly I know that we all want to support working families. We do. Families are the backbone and building blocks of our nation, and whether it's a small business, medium size or large, we want the people to have the ability to be able to work, have the ability to look after their children, have the ability to contribute to the economy. It all works in cycle, it all works in tandem. Now, whilst the Coalition will support this bill, more needs to be done to ensure that small businesses aren't burdened by exhaustive red tape. And I do earnestly and honestly worry, Deputy Speaker, about the impositions placed on small business by this government. The industrial relations impositions, the difficulty to trade in what already are difficult times, and the ability to not only attract new customers but to retain the customers you have is the age-old question for small business. And cutting through some of that red tape is so important. And I know we used to have red tape days when we were in government, and to be fair, they indeed reduced some of the onerous responsibility, unnecessary responsibility on particularly small businesses already under a mountain of pressure and bureaucracy just to keep their doors open. Now, the Coalition calls on the government, the Labor government, to amend this bill to ensure paid parental leave payments are paid directly to the employee. To start a business in the present day is a challenging task, and I know there was a story in the Daily Telegraph just last week, about 80 businesses failing every week, and many of those were in the construction sector. And this is a huge burden to bear, particularly as though we have a housing crisis, and this is such a huge onerous responsibility on builders, weighed down by federal law, weighed down by state law, and weighed down indeed by local councils. And the fact that this story in the Telegraph headed "It's a big business bust," mentioning that more than 80 New South Wales businesses failing every week, it said in the very first paragraph that this was a jump of nearly 40% in a year. Now, paid parental leave is important. Making sure workers are paid the right amount for their labours is absolutely necessary, no question. But when you have businesses failing at the rate that John Rolfe's article indicated, it is a concern. And I approached a businessman in my electorate, a home builder by the name of Wayne Carter, and he indicated that his concern, that he said that a heavy percentage of where the building industry is on its knees. They're my words, not his, but has been, to quote him, caused by the government-backed fringe requirements to increases to basics levels along with changes to the National Construction Code, adding extra cost to a build. And we've had many discussions in the past, and red tape is one of those things which he has mentioned regularly, consistently, about how difficult it is to keep the doors open. Already established businesses have a better chance to adapt, as changes to them are incremental, but When you open a business, when you start a business, years and years of red tape being built in, often proves to be an insurmountable obstacle that crushes innovation, prevents potentially what would be great businesses from ever having a chance to evolve. Government should be seeking to ensure it is as easy as possible for our best and brightest to start businesses. Young people, not so young people, metropolitan people, remote people, city people, doesn't matter. We need to provide the building blocks, the foundations, the starting point, call it what you like, to encourage businesses to take out that first loan, to try to attract that first customer, and that is so vital. The Motor Trade Association of Australia, peak body for many small and medium businesses in the car trade, held a survey on the matter about red tape stifling competition in the market. And interestingly, this survey found that 96.1% of respondents would prefer Services Australia to pay PLP directly, paid parental leave, PPL directly. If we want to support families and aspiring parents, we must also address what many would argue is an even bigger issue, and that is the affordability and availability of childcare. Now, I talk about this in relation to childcare because it is a huge issue in regional, rural and remote electorates. It's one thing to have affordable childcare, fantastic, but it's also available childcare. And unless you have that childcare centre in a rural area, doesn't matter how cheap, how inexpensive it is. Of course, they have to conform to all the necessary regulations naturally, but availability is a massive issue, According to an ACCC report, it was found that childcare fees outpaced inflation with increases of between 20 and 32%. For families on low incomes, the news gets even worse, with the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission finding that the lowest income households spending up to 21% of their household income. 21%. So when you think that that's nearly a quarter, and then you put on top of that rent or indeed paying off a home mortgage, and then you put on top of that grocery bills, in rural and regional and particularly remote Australia, you put on top of that the price of fuel going up and up and up. Don't see it going down anytime soon. I had a letter from a constituent just yesterday complaining about the high price of fuel in West Wyalong. It all amounts to more and more and more pressure on the household budget, and that is particularly so in regional Australia. Regional Australia, where I know the member for Page, the minister at the table, the Shadow Minister for Trade, the member for Wide Bay, we understand all too well because we're in touch with our constituents. They tell us about the difficulty of finding childcare places. Right. They tell us about the difficulty of cost of living. And that's not to say there weren't pressures when we were in government, but we were addressing them, and we did address them. And the cost of living crisis has gone through the roof under those opposite. Who, to my way of thinking, are not doing enough to address these issues. And it's not just my way of thinking, it is Mr and Mrs Average, it is people who regularly send me emails, regularly stop me in the street, regularly see me at all sorts of social and sporting events, and I know they're suing the member for Page because we talk. I know they're telling the member for Wide Bay because we talk about these things regularly because we care, and we do care, and we care about childcare. We care about paid parental leave. We care about the rising costs that people are trying as best they can to meet and to combat. According to the Care for Kids website, it's a tool where you can compare childcare costs across Australia. The average daily childcare rate in Wagga Wagga is $133 before subsidies. In Parkes, the average is even higher, $151. That said, there are many, innumerable, you'd almost argue, families which can't even get their child or children into childcare because there are simply no places. I talked earlier about affordability. Availability is just as important in this particular debate. And when you, as I said, factor in Labor's cost of living crisis, and it is Labor's because it's on Labor's watch, it's Labor's responsibility to address, and they're talking about everything but the cost of living crisis. We see that childcare, cost of paying off a home or even getting into the market is getting out of reach of so many, and you can understand why some couples, sadly, are hesitant to even start families because they want the best for their child, as any parent would and should, but they're delaying it, and that also creates difficulties later on. They can't simply afford it in the present dire circumstances. Now, more needs to be done to support Australian families who are raising kids to ensure we remain a society built upon strong families and not to discourage those aspiring to have children. We can look across the globe to see what can happen if we don't support families enough. And, you know, in some countries the birth rate is well below replacement, and that is a concern. It is a concern for for Western civilisation. Indeed, in Japan, things have become so desperate that families are being offered $1 million to move out of Tokyo to reverse population decline and enjoy a more comfortable life in rural municipalities. I have to say there's nothing wrong in living in rural municipalities, and we found that during COVID. The fact that many people chose to leave the big, bright city lights and move to regional Australia where the freedoms were more. It was a safer place to live when the global pandemic was at its worst. Indeed, it was open. It was people could move about freely without being kept to largely their local government areas, which was the case in Sydney and other capital cities. I mean, the lockdowns in Melbourne were they're still suffering PTSD from them, quite frankly. Western Australia, we just shut itself off from the rest of the country, but we addressed the global pandemic very, very well, and I pay credit to the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the then Treasurer Josh Frydenberg for the members for Cook and the former member for Kooyong for what they did to keep this country safe, people in jobs and people even alive in those terrible times. Now, as I say, paid parental leave is important. It's a necessary part. It's a good part of modern living to the point where parents can go out and work, and not just women too, because it's a whole new world in which we live, and we want to encourage women and men to have that ability to be able to have a good work-life balance, to be paid parental leave, but we also want to make sure that we encourage businesses to be able to afford to offer every right workplace condition in this day and age. And what we don't want to see is businesses particularly not employing women as a result of any onerous thing that is put in place, because we want to encourage women in the workforce. I was proud of the fact that whilst we were in government, the incentives we put in place which led to a number of women in employment, and that is fantastic. Women who were mothers, men who were fathers. Record number of jobs. This paid parental leave amendment, we want to support. We want to support the provisions within, but I very much support the amendments put forward by the member for Deakin.
Yeah.